and welcome to the Olive Branch Community Church. My name is Kathy, and it's so great to have you here with us today. Today, Pastor Ken continues his series entitled The Workout. And you're like, I hate working out. Exercising, this is the most terrible subject possible. But let me encourage you. Can you think of anything in your life that is of any value that didn't take any work? Right? Anything of value in our life takes some kind of work. And it's so satisfying when you see that fruit. And this is what Pastor Ken is getting at. The things that we need to do in order to grow the kingdom of God in our life so that we can be a blessing to others, it's kind of a workout. And so what are those things that we need to be training ourselves to do, or training ourselves to think differently, or training our hearts to hold things that are more valuable than the cheap things of this world that we're still hanging on to? Those things are worth doing. So let us encourage you today that these things, let's pay attention to them. Let's ask the Holy Spirit to really show us and teach us about what we need to do in our spiritual workout. So before we get into that though, let's spend some time worshiping God, and He is worth every bit of worship that we can give Him.
We're in the middle of the series called The Workout. And basically what it's talking about is talking about the fact that if you want to do something, if you want to have a trim, fit body, if you want to lose weight, if you want to, do just about anything, you have to be on some kind of a workout. There has to be some kind of thing that you're doing, energy that you're putting into something to make it happen. Now, when Jesus started, he worked with 12 disciples, as you know, and they were on kind of a workout for 3 years. And within 3 years, he basically created 12 men who would go on to change the world. Here's kind of the basic truth, and that is that, when it comes to workout or anything like that, study, everything worthwhile is always uphill. It always is. And so if you want to do anything significant, that's what you have to plan on. So I was thinking about Jesus and thinking about the way he worked with his apprentices, and I thought, I wonder what Jesus would be like if he was a 30-year-old adult in our culture, guy, you ever think about the fact, I wonder if he would have a cell phone, I wonder if he would be on Instagram, I wonder if he would post selfies and what kind of selfies he would post and so on, and what would he drive? Would Jesus drive a 1992 Hyundai Pony, or would he drive a Hummer, or would he drive a Jeep? Would he drive a Leaf? And would he buy stuff on Amazon? Just some thoughts like that, because he was a normal guy in his culture. When he came out of the shadows, it wasn't like everybody had been pointing to him. He surprised everyone. And what would he say to some of the people in our world? You ever thought about that? Like, what would he say to Donald Trump? What would he say to Jeff Bezos? What would he say to Elon Musk? What would he say to Justin Trudeau? Be interesting to know, don't you? By the way, I don't know if you know this or not, but Jeff is heading for poverty. This past year, he lost $57 billion. And from what I understand, he's only got like 130-some million left, which would put him at number 3 on the Holy Trinity of all the people who make money. So this is kind of the Holy Trinity as I see it, okay? So you've got, Elon, he's got 201 billion, so he's like near the top of the food chain. There's a guy over in France who has more than him. And then there's Jeff, okay? Jeff is down to 145 billion, so he's gone up a little bit from the last stat I saw. And then Bill, remember Bill? So Bill only has 114 billion, like he's number 5 or 6 on the list and stuff like this. Now the question is, for them and for us, what's the end game? Like, what is it that you want to do? You got a lot of money. What do you want to do with it? And how are you going to end up at that end game? See, what I like to do is, or what I have done is I've kind of looked at the end game of other people. Looked at the end game of my dad. My dad was a magnificent man. You talk to any of my kids and they would say he was loving, he was kind, he was generous, he was funny, But there was part of his end game that I don't want to imitate, and that's his health, because he didn't take care of his health. And it wasn't like he died young. He was 80 years old when he died, but it's like what happened to him before he died and how he lost things that he wanted to do. So my end game when it comes to my health is I want to be in better health than that. I'm going to do my best to try and make that work out. You look at the end game, do you want your end game to look like the lone arranger, Russell Oliver? These guys grab cash, and stuff, has all his dancing girls. Is that what you want your end to look like? Everybody has an end game. Everybody has something that they would like people to think about them and say about them when it's their last day, when they're the one in the box. We go to stores, when we're moving, and this is like when we get preoccupied with boxes, and I think Jerry Seinfeld has a whole thing on this, and he says, you're looking for boxes everywhere. And he goes, do you have any boxes? Boxes. You have any boxes that I could use? I'm moving, I need a box, You go everywhere. And he tells in this whole thing that he does about how he, saw this funeral procession and followed them, and got to the funeral home, and they open up the hearse, and they take out this casket, and he says, it's the perfect box. My stereo would fit really nicely in there. He says, can I have that box when you're done with it? Well, actually, dying is kind of the ultimate move, isn't it? From this earth until next. So we think about that. We think about maybe sometimes we don't think about what do I want my end game to look like? I think most of us would say, I wouldn't want people to be able to say about me, that I'm generous. Because when we're babies, we start out and it's just take. I don't want people to stand up at my funeral and say, Ken Davis was a great taker. Like he never learned to give, but he was a great taker. You could see all the stuff that he has. That's not what I want, and I don't think that's what you want either. But the problem is that, we go through life and we have all this stuff, and the box that we're in at the end isn't big enough for all the stuff that we accumulate. We all know has to stay here, right? And so what's the end game going to be for you? Like, what are you looking for? What are you exercising for? What are you pulling for? See, I think it makes sense to pull for the difference that God has called us to make in this world. But for that to happen, we have to learn how to give. And that's a tough thing. Now, to hear this right, we have to move away from this whole thing of, what rich people have and what rich people give, and it has to get into the thought of, what does God want me to do with my money and my stuff? And of course, the key word here that we miss out on is the word my. If I understand the Bible correctly, and I think I do, it's not like it's all my stuff. Everything that we have has been given to us, and so what you could accurately say is, God owns, I manage. He is invested in me, and he wants me to invest in what he's up to in this world. Most powerful record of what Jesus says about money is an account of his life that's written by Luke. Luke is a Greek physician, and you have to understand, this guy wrote his dissertation, on Jesus and on the history of the church. It's an amazing account. So in his account, Jesus is having this public meeting with people where he's teaching them. We go through a little headwind if you're a follower of Jesus, in our culture where, people try to force us to, quote the party line and give us trouble if we don't. Well, back in Jesus' day, it was just downright dangerous. And so he's talking to these people and he says, don't be afraid of people who can only kill the body. I think about that, only kill the body? That doesn't sound very good to me. He says this, fear the one who can send both body and soul to hell. So he's in a very important conversation with people. And this guy comes into this crowd and it's like he's in the back, ooh, choose me. So Jesus calls on him and he says, Can you get my brother to split the inheritance with me? Now, inheritance can be gnarly stuff. So you kind of understand what he's going through here if you've ever been in there. And you may not like Jesus' answer, because Jesus said to him, beware, not for your brother, guard against every kind of greed. He says, life is not measured by how much you own. So what is greed? Is greed, Jeff Bezos, with all the money he has, wanting more, is it what is it? Greed is not Russell Oliver, with his hands full of dollars, saying, I'm the Lone Ranger, I will give you money for your gold. It's not Jeff Bezos with his money. Greed is not stock, Wall Street or Bay Street or any stock market. I heard greed defined once as this: if it comes to me, it belongs to me, all of it. And that's what you see in this story. To illustrate greed and the goal of greed and accumulation, Jesus tells a story. Now, the guy in Jesus' story is a wealthy guy, okay? He has a lot. And he has this huge business problem. You know what it is? It's too much inventory. His dirt is so fertile, it's producing too many crops, too much wheat. And he said, I've got this problem. I've got to solve this problem. Now, a lot of businesses would like to have that problem, right? So then one day, he figures out a solution to the problem. And he's so happy about this, because it's going to make him a lot of money. He crows to all of his friends and all of his business associates. He says, I solved the problem. He says to his wife, we're going to be able to take those trips that we always wanted to take, but I got to figure this out. Listen to what he says, his solution. Then he said, I know. I'll tear down my barns and I'll build bigger ones. And then I'll have room enough to store all my wheat and other goods. And I'll sit back and I'll say to myself, my friend, you have enough stored away for years to come. Now take it easy, eat, drink, and be merry. Did you notice how many times he uses the word I, me, and my? That's in some ways kind of the holy trinity of selfishness: I, me, my, and of course mine. That's the big one. That's what it all kind of centers around there. So let me just kind of put it into our language, okay? Late one night, his wife come downstairs, and he's sitting there with his laptop, and he's still working on the solution to this problem. She says, honey, why don't you come to bed? He said, no. He says, I've almost got it. Like, I think I figured out how we're going to handle all this inventory. And, man, we're about to bust the mother load on this thing. Like, we're going to make this happen. He said, just give me a few more minutes. So she goes to bed, wakes up about 3 and decides to come down and see how he's doing. And he's there still at the kitchen table with his face on the laptop. And she says, he's just like a little kid. He won't go to bed. But when she puts her hand on his neck, it's cold. Paramedics say that it was a massive heart attack, and he's been dead for hours. Now, when the financial community finds out about this, it makes headlines in the Wall Street Journal and the business section of all the papers, cutting-edge entrepreneur dead at the age of 52. Everybody's astounded. Everybody's astonished that he would die. And at his funeral, he had, people get up and they talk about, what a genius he was, how he was an inventory specialist, how he was an entrepreneur that rocked the market, that he was coming up with cutting-edge answers to everything and so on. And they all crowed about him and said what an inspiration he was to them. And they all walked by his coffin that day and said the same dumb things that people always say when they walk by a coffin. Why doesn't he look like himself? He sure looks like he's at peace. Well, rigor mortis will do that to you. And they erected a monument over his grave. And on the monument, they had carved into this piece of stone all the things that they had used to describe him. Entrepreneur, business guru, business, inspiration to everybody. And after they let the gravesite, with all the flowers and the notes and everything in this monument to his success, an angel of God came that night and traced on his monument the one word that God had to describe him. You know what the word was? Of course you do. You know the story. Word was full. And Jesus goes on to say, and he says, what else do you call somebody who blows through life and misses the one thing that is so obvious every day? We die. Jesus puts it like this. Yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth and not have a rich relationship with God. Now, here's the core question in all this, okay? If what we have in our lives, everything we have has been entrusted to us by God, and if his intent is that we invest it, sure, we invested in ourselves, but we also invested in what he's up to and invested in loving other people, then what if we don't? What if we don't? This guy was surrounded by people in need. If you know anything about Jerusalem and Israel back in that day, it was filled with people, many of whom were starving, widows whose husbands had died, and they had nothing to live on. The only alternative was prostitution. So there were lots of needy people, and this guy's thinking, what in the world will I do with everything that I've stored up? And he doesn't even think of the people around him. And the truth is that we are prone to fall into this when it comes to what we have and to think only of ourselves. Well, I made the money. It's about me. What about my boat, my car, my house, my family? It's mine. That's very natural to think that. Jesus put it like this. He said, seek the kingdom of God above all else, and he will give you everything you need. So don't be afraid, little flock, for it gives your Father great happiness to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to those in need. It gives you a heart attack, doesn't it? And this will store up treasure for you in heaven, and the purses of heaven will never get old or develop holes. Your treasure will be safe, so that no thief can steal it and no moth can destroy it. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be. Now, according to what Jesus says here, what's our biggest problem? Well, our biggest problem is fear. Mammon, what Jesus called the god of money and stuff, is the most revered god in our world. And all you have to do is just look down through history, and you'll see that this god has been worshipped. And our heart, you see, tends to be a major film producer of horror flicks. Fear causes that, and it produces horror flicks on, well, give? What do you mean give? What if I don't have enough? Jesus said, sell your stuff and give it to poor people. What if I don't have enough? What if I'm a poor person? That's our thought. See, for most people in our world, the good life is seen as having lots of stuff. It's kind of the key to meaning and happiness. And this is kind of like giving away your happiness. Why would I give away my happiness? It took me a long time to get it. And what Jesus reveals, and if we believe him on this, is that the cleverest, wisest, and happiest people in the world are not people who know how to stockpile and hoard their stuff for themselves. But it's the people who know how to use it in a way that makes a difference in this world and makes a difference in other people. See, what happens is God blesses others, and then this money that we have, the stuff that we have, it gets sent ahead of us into heaven. And this is the struggle, isn't it? We don't see heaven. We don't see anything going on up there. And we think, well, if I give it away, I don't have it here. And that's a problem for me. And so the question is the fear real? Well, fear is always real to the person who's afraid. The question is it realistic? Are you going to, be starved and have to walk around with a barrel around you because you don't have enough because you give? Jesus says, don't be afraid, little flock, because God, the one who runs everything, the one who knows everything, the one who made everything, is glad to give you the kingdom. And there's basically more where that came from. And Jesus would solidly be in the camp that says, go ahead, take a risk. See what I do. And you'll see this through a lot of the writings in the Bible. I'll make sure that you have everything you need. But it really comes down to trust, doesn't it? Can God be trusted? And our thought is, kind of the line from the movie, show me the money. Like, show me the money. You pour it all out here on the floor, and I'll sift through it, and if there's enough, I'll give some. But, it's not like I'm about to just trust some words in an old book. And this brings up all kinds of stuff. Is Jesus a liar when he tells us, to give? Is God a liar? Can God be trusted? See, that's what it gets right down into. It gets right down into the bottom line of our faith. And a lot of times we're afraid because the giving muscle in our bodies is flabby. Some of you, if you held up your arm, it just dangles back and forth, and sometimes the giving muscle, because you have to use it, you have to exercise it. And the point is that we exercise those giving muscles throughout our life. We start small, and then we continue to work on them, and it's kind of this workout that we have to do. To give. See, when we give, it's a direct attack on selfishness and greed. Breaks the back of selfishness. It's like saying, take that selfishness. I'm going to give this away. I'm going to give it to people who need it. And I'm depending on God, who's bigger than you. So let's see what happens. And just test him in that and try it. And it really gets into this. And I just want to challenge you on this. What do you really believe about God? Does he make promises he doesn't keep? Is he truthful? Why don't we give? I mean, we want to be known as generous people. We want to have given when life is over. Well, it's because we're convinced that what we have is ours. I mean, our name is all over, you look at our documents, you'll find that, my name, well, it's not on the house because it belongs to Lori, but it's on the car, and on all kinds of stuff. My name is right there as the owner. And we begin to fall in love with this stuff, and we think, well, it actually is all mine. And so you have to ask the question, so who ultimately has given you life? Who gives you every breath that you take? Who placed you in North America where you would have the opportunity to make money and have plenty and have as much food as you wanted to eat and put gas in your car and do all these other things? Jesus summarizes our lives like this, and he says, from everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. And from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be demanded and will be asked. We've been given much. You look at our world and see what we have in comparison to other people. We've been given much. That would apply to us. Now, I think most people would say to billionaires, you are accountable for all this wealth that you've accumulated. Say to, Jeff Bezos, for example, he's an easy target, right? You have $145 billion. What about the people who don't even have enough to eat? You are accountable for that. And most people would think, hey, if you get out and interview people in downtown Toronto and say, what do you think? Do you think that, it would be a good idea for Jeff Bezos and to, for Mark Zuckerberg and for, all these other people to be able to give away part of what they have to feed people? They would all say, yes. If you have that much money, you ought to be generous. So the question then is, well, what about us? Bible talks, when it talks about giving, especially in the Jewish scriptures, it talks about giving a tenth, okay? So let's kind of use that figure. So if you were to say to Jeff Bezos, hey, you know what? You need to tithe what you have. So he looks at $145 billion. That means I've got to give away $14.5 billion. I don't think so. Because it seems like a lot of money. And we're the same way, We think, well, like I make $100,000 a year. I mean, $10,000? You've got to be kidding. You think I ought to just give that away? And that's why, you see, with muscles, you don't start out, if you haven't exercised, like your most exercise has been, running from, your lazy boy to the fridge. You don't start out with a, 300-pound bench press because everything's flabby. You start small. And that's what has to happen. With exercise, with anything that you do that's worthwhile, you start small. And that's why we have to start many times when we're younger. So can I just be honest here? You know what happens? We think, okay, well, someday I'm going to give. Well, we make more money, and so we think, okay, well, I can afford a bigger house. I can afford a nicer car. I can afford a dog who eats a lot of food, I can afford a pet. So there's all these things that we then buy, and then we get to the point where we look at our credit card and think, oh, my word, I'm maxed out. And we think, okay, well, I can't afford that anymore, so I'm going to wait until I can. And it just becomes this whole thing, okay? We just do it over and over and over again. We earn more, we max it out, we earn more, and we max it out. And we just never get around to it. And what happens, is money is an addiction, okay? That's just the way it is. You get addicted to money, and, you know how addiction goes, right? You feed an addiction, and it grows. It just keeps on going. And you get to the point where you really don't even think about it anymore because you think, well, somebody else ought to do that. What happens is that we ultimately let money into our hearts. And I'm telling you, you let money into your heart and it will harden your heart. It's like, plaque on the inside of your arteries, and it will harden it right up. And you won't be able to give. Remember Jesus' encounter with the guy who had everything? Remember, he had youth and money and power and so on. I think Jeremiah talked about him. What happens is that builds into your pride, into your ego, and you begin to think things like, well, if other people were a little bit more careful with their money and if they were wiser investors, they could be like me. They could be successful like me. And we're tempted to believe our own press. We're going to talk about Solomon next week and how he got to the point where he believed his own press. And I'm telling you, it ultimately took down his whole nation. Jesus was very clear that having money and stuff and being called a success by other people doesn't really have anything to do with what it means to be successful in this world. Because this guy that Jesus talked to was a success, and he refused to follow Jesus. When we give, we have a chance, if it's our end game, we have a chance to make a huge difference in this world. And so that's the question. What's your end game? What is it? Is it to accumulate? Is it to make a difference? Because, they're very, different things. See, there's a whole thing, especially I see it in Canada, and it's about success, We want to impress other people. We want to impress the people back home. We want to impress the people in our community and so on. And so to impress people means that you have to get something new, and it has to be important, and it has to look important, and so on. And what this can actually turn into when it comes to money, motives are, well, I want others to envy me. I want them to envy my body. I want them to envy my life. I want them to envy, my boyfriend. I want them to envy, my kids. I want everybody to envy me. Last time I looked in the Bible, envy is a sin. You mean you want other people to sin? It doesn't seem to make too much sense, does it? Now, I'm not trying to create guilt. I'm not trying to create shame or anything like that. But there just has to be a reality check on how off our whole culture is. We need to think, and we need to think through it in terms of what we want the end game of our life to be. Like when we climb out of the box on the other side of eternity and we step into heaven, what do you want that to look like? Is it going to be okay if you just spend everything on yourself? There's another false message from our world that just keeps us from giving and becoming generous. Let me start here, okay? Our world likes generosity. our world likes generosity. I mean, we really do, And so, we ask, should the rich people of the world, should they be generous? Should they give? And everybody's saying, yes, they should. And so sometimes they, give a little bit or whatever, and they go and serve, and everybody says, way to go, But for us, it feels like it's something that you do when you have enough left over. Well, then you give that, okay, after taking care of yourself. And Jesus contradicts that. He really does. Mark records a moment near the end of his life, where Jesus actually went into the temple and he sat opposite to the box where people were coming and putting in their contributions to the temple. That'd be a little intimidating, having Jesus standing there, right, watching his people. So there are people that are dropping in some serious coin, ka-ching, 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 ching, 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 ching. And then there's this tinkle. And this woman, widow, put in two little kind of copper coins, about the thickness of a piece of tinfoil. Okay, so this was nothing. And it's like Jesus, whoa, he brings his disciples. He called his disciples to him and he said, I tell you the truth, this poor widow has given more than all the others who are making contributions. For they gave, listen to this, a tiny part of their surplus. But she, poor as she is, has given everything that she had to live on. Apparently, just giving to God a tiny bit of your surplus is not a big deal. It's like, you just use the rest for yourself? Is that the deal? And what this woman, this widow, somehow understood that these other people didn't is, I'm going to give this, and I'm not going to miss it, because God has always been faithful to me. And so I'm going to give him what I have to live on, and he's going to take care of me. He's going to take care of me. Giving does something that nothing else does. And what I'm thinking from Jesus and what he's saying here is that giving ought to create a little bit of pain and a little bit of discomfort. It's like exercise, If you're not out of breath and you're not breaking a sweat, you're not exercising. Let's say, and you're not going to grow. When we give, it ought to create a little bit of pain. It ought to create a little bit of discomfort, because you're exercising a muscle. And for the muscle to grow, you have to burst the cells in there, and then they have to grow more cells and all the stuff that goes into building muscle. And you'll have to make some decisions. You'll have to make some decisions in your life. So, anyways, I'm just going to ask you to vote today on a couple of different things, okay? So, let's talk about coffee, okay? How many of you are Starbucks fans? You got to have your Starbucks in the morning or you just can't live. Or how many of you are Tim Hortons fans, okay? You got to have your Tim Hortons. You go to Timmy's and you just pick up a donut or something else along the way, What about McCoffee? I've been hearing about this. I haven't had one yet. I'm not sure I want one, but you're like McCoffee devotee. You go to McDonald's and you get your McCoffee there, How many of you are milk fans? I see a lot of babies out there raising their hands, they love milk. So typically, coffee, by the time you're done buying it and jazzing it all up, it's about $3 a cup, right? So let's say you got to have your coffee every day. It's not a big deal. You go to the drive-in, or maybe go into Starbucks or whatever, or into Tim Hortons and so on. And so you get your $3 of coffee. Now, I figured this out with a calculator, actually, and that's about $3 a day. Okay, so you kind of translate into a year. If you do this every day for a year, it's going to be about $750. So that's not a huge deal, but you think, okay. Now, if you think about that, if you're thinking about that right now, it's like, oh my word, I spent $750 this past year on coffee. How could I do that to myself? You're probably not thinking that. You're thinking, it's worth it. I'm worth it. I'm worth a good cup of coffee. Let's talk pizza, okay? So some of you are Pizza Hut fans, you started this long time ago and you're in love with Pizza Hut, or Pizza, or Pizzaville, or Pizza Nova, which is kind of a Canadian thing. I think they've had an ad on the radio for a long time, Or maybe it's like your Christian chicken. You're like Swiss Chalet, or maybe you're Wendy's, By the way, I have some wonderful Wendy's coupons here, and you can go to Wendy's if you want and get your deal on that. So, we have all kinds of. So I figured about this with all the Chef Chan, all the other stuff that we order in, that typically people will spend somewhere around $2,000 a year. I figured, $30, $40 a week. That ends up being about $2,000 a year on pizza, okay, or takeout food or something along that line. Now, it's not a big deal. It's kind of a nice treat for the family and so on. But I thought about that in terms of, a church like this, okay? So our annual budget right now is about $1 million. And so if everybody, instead of, eating pizza and drinking coffee, were to just say, I'm going to give that to the church, that comes out to over $1 million a year. You figure about 400 people, who call this home and so on. It's a lot of money. And my point is not, let's go do that. Just give your coffee money to Jesus and fast on coffee. That's not what I'm saying. That's theory. But I want to encourage you about that giving is not the big serious deal that's going to bankrupt you. It's way smaller than that. And when people get together and do something that's significant with what they have, that what they're never really going to miss, good things can happen. What if a portion every week of what you have went into changing the world? What if he said, I am going to put a portion in every week, and I'll tell you, it's good to start with a percentage. It doesn't have to be 10%, but it's good to start with a percentage and say, I think it's only fair that 3% of what I bring into my home or 5% of what I bring into my home goes into this world to make it a better place, to bring Jesus' kingdom of grace and healing and mercy and forgiveness to other people. What if you were to do that? It could change an awful lot. See, if you're going to take this seriously, then it has to be that, and there are various authors in the Bible that say, so give that first. Like, don't just wait until you have leftovers and say, oh my word, well, I've only got $10 left this week. I'll have to cheat God. No, it's like, give it first and see what happens. One of the specific problems that we face right now in 2023, specifically after COVID, is that, man, it's jacked up the price of everything. And I'm sure you probably noticed that. You go shopping for groceries, and the price of groceries, they say it's gone up at least 15%. I think there are stores that have jacked it up a lot more than that, okay? Now, to counteract that, many times what happens in our lives is we use credit cards, your flexible friend. And there's not a problem with that. You got to keep it under control or this thing will eat you alive. And then, of course, just about every other week or maybe month or whatever, we get one of these, which is, hey, use our credit card, use our, chain of money and so on. And there's always somebody out there. Why? Well, it's because they make money off of you, You have a credit card with them, they're going to make a lot of money off you. Now, when you take what you have and you give it to God and give it to other people and so on, there's a faith component there that you have to give, and God will always honor your faith. Proverbs, Solomon, who honestly had a lot of money, he said this, honor the Lord with your wealth and with the best part of everything you produce, and then he will fill your barns with grain and your vats will overflow with good wine. You think, I don't have vats, I don't have barns filled with grain. What he's basically saying is that God has ways of working in your life and making sure that you have everything you need. Jesus put it like this, okay? He said, give and it will be given to you, a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be poured into your lap. And then this, for with the measure that you use, it will be measured to you. So, if you've got this little coffee scoop, you think, I'm going to give you this much, God, and I'll give you this much. What do you want? Is that what you want him to do for you, to bring it back to you? Followers of Jesus in Philippi, gave generously to help Paul in a difficult time. And he told them that what they did was like a whole worship service to God. He says this, and this same God who takes care of me will supply all your needs from his glorious riches, which have been given to us in Christ Jesus. And I'm not talking, please don't understand, I'm not a televangelist. I'm not saying, give and God will make you rich. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that God has ways of enabling you to give and to make a difference with what he's entrusted to you. And he has entrusted it to you. He's entrusted it to you to invest, not just in yourself, but in other people. And that's what he wants us to do. Imagine getting to the other side and realizing, that you actually could have made a real difference, but you never did. There are people that you could have invested in. There's a difference that you could have made. And yet when you look at your bank accounts, and all of our bank statements tell a story. My financial records, I like me a lot. I've given me a lot of stuff. So you just check off on the financial records, everything that went to me. And then when it gets to God, Well, that's another financial record, isn't it? And by the way, does my best friend count? What about my dog? And because our financial records tell us where things have gone. And when push comes to shove, when you come down to the end of things, you're going to want to give. You're going to want to make a difference. Years ago, when our family went on vacation, we would many times have a Monopoly-a-thon, and it kind of went every day. We'd start at maybe 10 o'clock or something like that. Everybody, kind of got up and got their tea or their coffee or whatever, and then we'd start. And we loved the game, We loved the game. And this was even before, Markomopoly came out. Now, Lori wasn't one for games, so it was mainly me and the kids. But I had a strategy. See, the strategy in Monopoly is exactly the name, You buy everything that you possibly can. Buy everything in sight, You put your property in hock if necessary. And then you put houses and hotels on everything you possibly can. And you can make a lot of money. And then slowly but surely, I would basically, expose the soft underbellies of my kids. And I would take everything from them. I would cripple their industries. I would shut down their railroads. I would steal their houses and take their money and their property. And I would leave them penniless. And then I would hold the money up to my chest and I took it all. I took it all. It all belongs to me, And the kids would say, grow up, Dad. Come on, really, But when the game was over, it all went back in the box. See, that's just the way it is. The ship goes back in the box, And the top hat, it goes back in the box. Illinois Avenue goes back in the box, even though you made a lot of money from it. And Marvin Gardens goes back in the box. The railroads go back in the box. All the money goes back in the box. When the game is over, it all goes back in the box. I thought about it like this. There's the pizza thing and so on. When the game is over, it all goes back in the box. And that's really the bottom line in life, isn't it? When it's over, that's all it is. See, that's where your end game has to be better than just finishing life and having a bunch of money left, and a smile on your face as you lie there in a coffer, because it all goes back in the box. And life is about, when it comes to money, it's about basically pursuing what you cannot do. And I'm telling you, you get to the end of your life, and there's not a thing that you can do about making a difference. You can't look back over your life and say, wow, I wish I could make a difference. Maybe I'll get reincarnated, or I'll come back, and I'll make a difference, for the last 3 months, and I'll really help people. You can't do it. Not when you're on the other side, not when you're back in the box. And that's why you have to make the difference before that happens. See, when you give, you are investing in the lives of other people who will all stand before God, people who can then potentially make a difference for their lives. We have to give an account. Jesus said, he's going to say to the sheep, you saw me in need. You saw that I was hungry. You gave me something to eat. You saw that I was thirsty. You gave me something to drink. You saw that I was naked, and you clothed me. See, that's what he's talking about. He says, even when you do this for the least of my brothers. And then that begins to compound. Interest is an amazing thing, unless you get it working against you. You get it working against you, it'll take you down. But if you get it working for you, what you have invested in other people will last for eternity. It gets into their descendant lines. It gets into the things that they do and the difference that they make. And you're able to share in all of that, and it's waiting for you, but you can't see it. You can't see it. And that's the problem. Some of you may be thinking to yourself, I can't possibly give. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. You can give. You can. You just have to make it a priority. And it's what you will wish that you had done. Because when the game is over, it all goes back in the box. Let's pray. God, help us to invest now in what we want to see later on. Not just at the end of our lives, but in eternity, the part of us that still is a mystery, and the part of us that still is out there, a little uncertain. Help us to believe, truly believe what you have said, and invest accordingly. Amen. May God give you strength. May God give you the capacity and the wisdom to strategize what you're going to do for your end game and make the difference that God has called you to make.